I mean, the question we both often get asked, of course, is how do I know now what the long-term likely success of my brand is going to be? And clearly, you know, there's a lot of work going on here. What we do know is that many of the proxy measures used in the past were simply not good enough. I mean, pre-testing is the most obvious technique that gets used to evaluate this. What we now know is that most pre-testing techniques, where they were validated against sales, were validated against short-term sales. So they've been designed and have evolved over the years as ways of optimizing short-term sales effectiveness. And that, of course, tends to lead advertisers to these, you know, reason why functional kind of approaches, because they always win out in that kind of environment. Unfortunately, they tend to under-deliver in the long term.
I think what everybody would like is a pre-testing technique which is going to predict long-term effectiveness. And at the moment we don't have one. And there are a number of reasons for this, I think. One is, as Peter said, it's about judging emotional responses, and those are difficult to measure in themselves. Secondly, it's hard to measure the emotional response properly when you're not dealing with a finished piece of communication. Emotional responses to, for example, animatics are very different often from response to the finished film. Thirdly is the fame factor. So as we've identified, fame is really important to your long-term success, and that's something that's hard to predict in the lab because it's about how people interact with one another in the real world, herd effects and so on. That's, I mean, one way to deal with that, of course, is, and this is much more the sort of in tune with the sort of the digital way of doing things, is make something and beta test it in the real world and see what flies. And it's quite interesting to see that, for instance, P&G have a mantra which is, what do they call it, digital backwards. So do a piece of digital activity, see if it works online. If it works online, then think about transferring it to TV, for example. So that effectively online marketing activity becomes the pre-testing technique.